Stakeholder.
In gambling, an independent party with whom each of those who make a wager deposits the money or counters wager.
A person with an interest or concern in something, especially a business.
In emergency management, any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival and recovery of a given community. You.
Welcome to Stakeholder Prepping.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you are the stakeholder in your own survival. We are your hosts. My name is Chris.
And I'm AC. And today, we're talking about something that comes around every year and something that can be planned for and mitigated against and survived and recovered from with the right kinds of preparation. So we are going to talk about hurricanes.
Yes, hurricanes.
Not the boozy drink from New Orleans.
Oh.
Something a little less destructive than that.
Dang. I was really hoping to get plastered. But
Patty O'Brien's on Bourbon Street, man. They're famous.
There we go.
It's world famous. Anyway, so let's talk about hurricanes.
Yes, hurricane season did officially start in earnest on June 1st, and it goes all the way until November 30th of each year. Really, before we go any further, if you do want to see more detailed notes on this or any of our episodes, links to anything that we discuss on this episode, or we actually have all of our other episodes on there as well, don't forget to visit stakeholderprepping.com. You can also see the list of our discount codes and other useful information at the bottom, so definitely helps.
Yeah, and you can there's a link there for our eBay store where you can get some merch. We don't have a lot of stuff on there, but we've got our Tinder cards, and we do have a couple of the handcuff keys that we got from Shomer Tech and the custom stakeholder red. They're there, so you can get some of our merch on our eBay store if you'd like to. And obviously, all our coupon codes that we've secured specifically for you guys. Anything we talk about, we've got a coupon code, or in some cases, we've got links. But let's talk hurricanes. And through this, we're going to be going back actually to some pretty cool historical references. But we're going to include ways that you and your family can survive some of the most powerful natural disasters on the planet. And this is a little more regionally specific. So if you live in a hurricane-prone area, this is probably more relevant to you. But maybe you travel or you vacation to hurricane zones, because let's be honest, the best kind of beaches in the world are in hurricane zones, right? I mean, that's just a fact, right?
It's just kind of how it works.
It's just kind of how it works. And something else I will add, if you're prepared for a hurricane, you're prepared for a whole lot of other disasters, because a hurricane means the grid is going down, structures are damaged to disappeared, and you may be on your own for an extended period of time. So it's fair to say, when you're prepared for a hurricane, you're kind of prepared in general. And Chris found this cool quote. I don't know where this came from. I like it. But it says, in a hurricane, you're not just protecting your house, you're protecting your role in the system, your family, your block, and your recovery network.
When I found that quote, I had to include it because that came up in my research for this. And that was actually from someone in Texas right after the Galveston hurricane. And one of their property, or I guess their property, was one of the only ones remaining standing after that hurricane hit Galveston, Texas. And so they prepared for the end of their world, and they actually survived. So I picked up that quote, and just kind of neat. But really, let's talk. You mentioned how hurricanes are regional. So broad scale, hurricanes are generally the Western Hemisphere. Typhoons are generally the Eastern Hemisphere. And you will never see a typhoon or a hurricane pass over the equator. They're going to stay on their side of the equator, whether it's north or south. They do form over water. So if you are near the equator, but not directly on it, And if you're next to either the Pacific or the Atlantic or the Indian Ocean, you are at risk for hurricane or typhoon. And in the United States, that goes all the way from the very southern tip of Texas all the way up the Gulf through Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, and then back around the other side, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all the way up to Virginia. So it's regionally specific, but it's a big region.
It's a big region. Now, I was going to ask you, Chris, from an insurance standpoint, do your actuaries and your underwriters, do they have to redo all of people's like insurance premiums and lower their premiums because we've never had a hurricane in the Gulf of America in recorded history? Does it work like that or no?
I don't think it quite works that way
Because
because,
they've never had a hurricane there. In all those places you just mentioned, anywhere in the Gulf of America has never had one.
yeah, Gulf of America has not had one, but that could change this season.
It could. That's
Um,
true.
from what I've seen, there are something like 17 named storms, and 12 of them are supposed to be severe, which is category 3 or above.
Hmm.
So this could be an active season. We're already starting to see some waves coming across the Atlantic, that's Saharan dust that as it blows from Africa off of the Saharan plains across the Atlantic Ocean, it provides these big waves of dust, which that's what water in the atmosphere can stick to, which creates clouds, which that's kind of where we get our hurricanes from as they start to form in cycles. Um, that water temperature is just going to continually feed up into those clouds until they gain enough momentum to start spinning. And then once they start to spin, we're looking at tropical depression. And then if they hit a certain speed, we look at a tropical storm. Once they get past that tropical storm stage, now we're into hurricane territory and it gets a name. From an insurance perspective, a lot of people around the country will know what I'm talking about when I say a hurricane deductible. It's actually very common in Florida, which is the most common state for hurricanes, but they will have a separate deductible on their insurance policy that is usually a percentage of the value of the home. And it applies to named category 1 or greater storms only. So if it's a tropical storm and you've got a $1,000 deductible, if it levels your house, then it's only a $1,000 deductible. If it becomes a hurricane and it levels your house, now you have your hurricane deductible. And that deductible applies if it does minimal damage or completely takes the home itself. So, from an insurance
Oh.
perspective, just be aware and look at your policy and understand when it says hurricane, it means a named category 1 or greater storm that does that
Oh,
damage.
that's how they define that. That's interesting. Like, I don't have hurricane insurance. I don't think I require it. It's not really up there on my risk matrix. But I did actually go purchase earthquake insurance. And earthquakes, earth movement, what they call it in my policy, is always completely excluded. So the any earth movement, meaning whether I just have a little bit of a landslide or the there's erosion under the deck and it falls down, any of that stuff is totally excluded. But with the earthquake insurance, it just basically it's exactly that. It's a 10% deductible against earth movement. So you don't really have to go and say, well, was that an earthquake or not? It's I think it's like it's the earth. If the earth moves, then now I have coverage for that. But it's 10%. It's huge. It's a huge deductible if you had a total loss.
It is, but it's also a smaller deductible than paying everything out of pocket.
That's
So
right. Yep.
if you've got a $300,000 house and a $30,000 deductible, if Mother Earth gets a rumbly tumbly and your house is next on the snack list,
Yep.
30,000 is a lot easier to
It's
come
a
up with.
$270,000 check just sitting there that you have to know how to cash.
Exactly.
Yep.
So insurance is a huge prep, and that applies for hurricanes just as much as earth movement, earthquakes, fires, neighbor kid learning how to drive and ends up parking in your living room.
Yep.
Guess what? That's what your insurance is for. So
Yep. So why don't you, Chris, will you talk about like, what the hurricane, what it actually disrupts? Because it's not people think about if you've never been through one, it's well, it blows through. And then once they kind of clean the streets up, then we're all good to go again. So what is that actually when you talk about the disruption of a hurricane?
Well, hurricanes aren't just wind and water. So that is kind of the tools at their disposal is wind and water, but you combine those and you get some really nasty effects. So you can have power grids go down, communication grids go down, your supply chain getting interrupted because debris is in the road or water is in the road. That's completely shut off. Hospitals, think of all the businesses and the cash flow that a hurricane can disrupt. So when we look at the impact of a hurricane, uh, looking at Hurricane Ian,
Oh
just
yeah,
Hurricane
sure.
Ian, it knocked out power for 2.7 million Floridians in under 24 hours. So FEMA's response time was a 3 to 5 day lag before widespread aid was able to get involved, and that actually came from the after action reports listed by NOAA and FEMA in 2023. So under 24 hours, 2.7 million people out of power. That's also your grocery store, the hotel that you might have been staying at, anything that doesn't have a backup generator and is relying on that grid. It's all down too. So it starts to become very quickly compounding.
Yeah, and I guess so hurricanes. Yeah, it's not just a wind event, but they disrupt all the systems. Like you said, it can be the power grids, the communications lines, the supply chains, emergency services. All those ripples affect everything. And think about communications, like landlines down, cell phone networks disrupted. Things like a satellite communicator or the Garmin InReach, that can really come in handy if you're just plain out not going to have phone service. You're not going to have cell. You're not going to have a landline. Even having something like Starlink would be huge. But think about if that's installed on top of your house when a hurricane hits, that thing basically becomes a four-pointed ninja star flying through your neighborhood at a couple hundred miles an hour. So you have to have some pre-planning there. If you have Starlink, you probably want to take that thing down off your roof. If you don't have Starlink, this is interesting. You can buy Starlink, and I did this recently. I have Starlink, and my neighbor has Starlink as well. And you can buy the hardware. I think new, maybe it's $500 for the hardware, and that's the thing that goes on your roof and their little wireless modem thing. But you can get them used as well. I think I saw a set on eBay for like $350. And the thing about that is you don't need to like call them to set it up like you would back in the day with like a cell phone. Like call from a different cell phone to turn the thing on. If you had Starlink and you had that thing in a closet and you just had that hardware, you could pull that out after a hurricane. And if you have power to plug that thing in, and there are lots of battery kits for them too, then you can do everything from the Starlink app on your phone. You could literally log into that piece of equipment, it talks to the satellite, and you could turn it on and pay for it. And that happens somewhere else on the planet. So that's kind of a cool thing to have. Like
Oh,
if
nice.
you could just have that there. And yeah, when you turn that thing on, you don't need to call anybody or go to a website. If you had that Starlink app on your phone, then you could literally do it through the Starlink, which is kind of cool. But yeah, having Starlink would be really cool because then you could make like Wi-Fi calls over satellite.
And all I can think of is with your reference to the Starlink uh, panel flying through the air is Shinobi throwing shurikens.
Yeah, sure. Or the cow flying around from Twister or something. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can become flying weapons in crazy hurricane strength winds. But you mentioned Hurricane Ian. Katrina is kind of the one we always talk about, right? Like Katrina that's like a course in emergency management school, and that taught us that it's the flooding, not wind, is like the deadliest part. Inland areas are not immune, so more people die from flooding than from the wind event itself.
Oh, 100%. So we really have to frame hurricanes a little bit differently. A hurricane is not an isolated event. It's more of a domino effect and a chain reaction. So you have to think beyond the eye of the storm and where that is. If you if you think of it this way, if you prep for the storm, but not the week after the storm, you're halfway there. you have to plan for your contingencies and what's going to happen when power fails, when water fails, when everybody's trying to drive out of the area and or trying to get back home. You have to plan for that as well because the recovery process takes time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that. That if you you're planned for the storm but not the after effects, you're 50% there, and that's still a failing grade. But yeah, you think about as these things are coming on shore, you've got notice, which is cool about hurricanes. They don't really just pop up in the middle of the night and take your house out. You usually see them coming. So you really just you have to watch TV, have your ear to the ground. You can see those things coming, tracking them using NOAA or Windy, which is a great app. I use that in the airplane all the time. That's one of the best weather apps I've ever seen, and it makes it very easy to consume, even if you're not a meteorologist. And then obviously, like the spaghetti models from the National Hurricane Center. And if anybody doesn't know what a spaghetti model is, Chris, can I explain that real quick? Because it's
Oh
just
yeah.
amazing. I love the way those models work. But if anybody's seen these in weather forecasting, this they call it a spaghetti diagram or a spaghetti plot or a spaghetti model. It's this visual representation of multiple computer model forecasts for a storm's potential path. And often, like a tropical cyclone or a hurricane, these spaghetti comes from the tangled appearance of these lines representing each model's prediction, which can look like sort of a plate of spaghetti. And they plot them out on this map, and different computer models, each with these slightly different initial conditions or parameters, generate their own predictions for a storm's path. So these predictions are plotted on this map with each line representing a single model's forecast. And lots of times they mostly follow the same path, but some of the models, I've heard them called like chaos models, they may have like a vastly different path. And the further the model goes, meaning the further into the future you ask it to predict, the more the paths widen from each other, because like the crystal ball gets foggier the further down the line you get. Now, if all of the models are aligned and they're all headed right toward you, then basically science is really against you at that point.
It is. And to visualize this in your head, if you've ever watched Loki on Disney Plus, where they're describing the sacred timeline,
Oh, yeah.
that's kind of what a spaghetti model is it can record everything in the past and put that into future predictions, but nothing is for certain until it's already happened. So looking at it that way, that's another good way to describe a spaghetti model. I really like the app Ventusky, which is run out of University of Kentucky, and I just like it because it's cool colors and it shows me the active wind speeds and the rotational patterns and everything like that. But when there's a storm, they'll include the spaghetti models on top of it, and it's just kind of almost ASMR for me to sit
Yeah,
there and watch it spin.
and you can use spaghetti models for a lot of different things. If you ever see like NASA or SpaceX, they use spaghetti models to guess where a rocket may crash. So when they launch these things, they have like a secured area, basically an area where um, they will launch, and if there was going to be any kind of disaster, they sort of predict using a spaghetti model with all these different predictions, like, okay, if this booster blows up at this time, and then they plot it out like a million times, and you get this crazy, it's a graph with or a map basically with a million different lines on it, and then they see kind of turn it into a heat map. So these spaghetti models become this heat map, and they say, okay, where are we more likely to have these events based on like launch predictions? So yeah, it's a very usable model in a bunch of different aspects of science.
It's the same thing as building out your risk matrix to accommodate for secondary, tertiary, quaternary effects.
It absolutely is. You're right.
So
It's a linear risk matrix.
there you go. But back to hurricanes instead of just the risk matrix that we could both go on for the rest of the hour.
Yes.
Let's kind of break out our preparation into 24-hour blocks. So
Okay.
72 to 48 hours away from hurricane impact, we're already monitoring NOAA, Windy, Ventusky, spaghetti models, anything from the National Hurricane Center. And we kind of want to begin this process of social signaling. So checking on family, if you do have neighbors that are friendly, checking on them for mutual aid, text chains, start notifying your work, your extended family, hey, we've got this coming. And then you can also use that time to fill any gaps in things like gear, fuel, if you need to go to the ATM and hit up cash, if you need to go to the drugstore and refill a prescription because you don't know how long it's going to be for the recovery, that's a really good time to do it. And really, this is kind of a stakeholder prepping exclusive, I guess. Initiate kind of a local resource watch. Who has what? Who's going to need help? This all comes down to mutual aid. So if you've got one person who's maybe disabled and does not have a vehicle that can take on high water, but they're of value to the group because they have all of the toilet paper, guess
Mm-hmm.
who's coming along?
Yep.
Aunt Ethel is getting strapped into the back seat of the truck.
Your invalid neighbor with all of that toilet paper, or maybe they used to be a doctor or something. Yeah, you're right. So that's kind of that 72 to 48 hours out. And then from there, when we get into that within that 48-hour window, this is when we start to secure the property, right? Window protection, loose debris, think about those gutters. It's funny, I built a cabin in the high desert of the Pacific Northwest, kind of a little bug out location, but in Miami County they have these HVHZ zone rated storm shutters. Have you ever heard of this? It's like high velocity hurricane zone rated storm shutters. They're actually like a Miami rating. And I looked at doing these on my cabin really for security, not for a hurricane thing. And they ended up being very expensive. So I built my own, but I was looking into shutters. And these are like, they used to only be the ones that look like a big rolly garage door. And now they make all kinds of cool ones, like really fancy ones for rich people. But it's these storm rated shutters, and I just think it's funny because they're like Miami rated. Are they Miami rated shutters? Yeah. So this HVHZ, this high velocity hurricane zone, it's a Florida building code requirement for basically anything within the Miami-Dade and Broward County lines. They have this specific rating just for them on like hurricane shutters.
Yep.
So
And they can take a 9-pound object at hurricane speed without shattering.
yeah, it's something crazy. Is that what it is at 9 pound? I thought it was something at 100 miles an hour, but I was like, holy crap, that's nuts. Like to not have broken windows if you have a brick flying at 100 miles an hour, that's insane. But
It's a diving weight faster than you can throw it, and it'll just bounce off. It might
Right.
scratch the glass or it might break the glass, but it's
Yeah.
not going through.
So having things, being able to secure yourself, that's important. Also, starting to set up those initial fallback zones, right? Interior rooms with backup water, things like that. I know, Chris, you have something like that, an interior room that's, your homemade hurricane shelter, things like that. Having those things planned. And then evacuation prep. If you're gonna go, you're gonna need to know the routes, printed maps, know your destination, the pet readiness part of it. Having a map is huge. And I know we talk about like this a lot. I feel like we're always talking about my topo, but I was just driving somewhere today and I've been there a bunch of times, maybe 40 miles from my home-ish or so. And I just naturally put my address in the GPS to get home. Not that I couldn't have found my way home, but I may have made one or two wrong turns before I found the freeway because I just don't go there all the time. Now, if minutes or seconds counted, if my safety was on the line, I could have found myself in a world of hurt if my cell phone just decided not to work. So,
Oh, I'm sure.
having the printed map, having the mytopo, it's huge. So yeah, that, and then some of that outside the box stuff, like, coordinate with your neighbors to share tools and water barrels and comms. If you've got a couple of radios, you don't need big long range radios. If you've got the little GMRS radio set, you could just take one of those next door to the neighbor's house, just so you guys could check in when the power's out and you don't want to go outside.
Yeah, it may still be raining. It may still have standing water that's, hip deep, and you don't want to risk going out to the alligators. So, hey,
Yep.
Steve, you doing all right? Okay,
Yep. No,
cool. Chat
absolutely.
tomorrow.
Absolutely. So that's that 24 to 48 hour window. Those are the things to think about.
The other thing that you can do with those MyTopo maps is, because you can customize them, you can actually kind of build your own overlay of areas that are more likely to flood because they have the topographic options. You can look at that low water area and overlay the FEMA flood zone map over the top of it
Absolutely.
and plan out your escape route. So, speaking of escape route, let's talk 24 hours or less until landfall.
Okay.
At this point, you may already have heavy, heavy rain. I know recently San Antonio, Texas, had 10 plus inches of rain in under 24 hours, and several people were killed in those flash floods. So maybe maybe it wasn't on their risk matrix, but either way, that's unfortunate. But when you're facing down the barrel of a hurricane, inside of that 24-hour time frame, you're committed. You're either bugging out or you're battening down the hatches and locking yourself in.
And like we say, remember, choose not to participate in all the chaos. Don't wait until everyone else does to make that call. Make that call earlier. Decide if you're going, get out of town before everybody else does and they, eat up all the combos at the gas station. I don't know why that's my go-to snack at the gas station, but or, all the fuel or whatever. Just don't participate. Either choose to stay and do that early, or choose to leave and do that before all the other idiots.
Absolutely. Because once you're into that 24-hour time frame, I mean, if you are using, we saw it with Hurricane Milton last year. After Helene had already gone up into West Virginia and destroyed all kinds of stuff, Hurricane Milton was right on its heels. There were a bunch of people that they were, I can wait one more day. I'll evacuate tomorrow after work. And they got stuck on the highway for hours and sometimes days because they ran out of fuel and there was no place to fuel up. There were opportunistic people that were driving down with pony tanks full of fuel and charging as much as $25 a gallon to refill people's tanks, because they went up into Mississippi and Alabama and then drove all the way back down and just stopped for
Right.
people on the highway. So really, that 24 hours or less, you're doing your final battery or power checks. You're reinforcing your communications, text trees, radio protocols. Maybe you're logging current weather conditions, taking maybe some video if it's safe, just so your insurance company understands what you dealt with.
Well, and you got to have it on the TikTok and the Insta, or how will everybody know how cool it is?
Right? It's not
Yes.
a hurricane party until someone's got it on video.
That's right.
This is when you're going to really lock in your food rotation, pet logistics. Start your rationing early if you need to. Don't hog everything down and then the next day you're scrounging around the pantry for whatever's left over. Start your
Sure.
rationing early, because you're not just protecting your stuff, you're protecting your own continuity. And that's a big part of this. As little as 24 hours before a hurricane hits, you can also have hurricane spawned tornadoes that hit, and they cause all kind of damage too. So if you're prepared ahead of the storm, you're more likely to survive whatever comes with it. Let's talk about what should be in kind of a baseline hurricane kit, right?
Okay.
All of this is also available on ready.gov. Great resource if you're just getting into prepping. But 7 days of water for a hurricane. Normally, FEMA suggests having a 3-day kit, a 72-hour kit. With a hurricane, depending on severity, you may be stuck there for a bit longer. So I would say 7 days of water at 1 gallon per person per day. That's 7 gallons minimum for just you. So if you've got a family of 5, now you're looking at 35 gallons of water at just about 8 pounds a gallon. That's pretty heavy. You're not moving that on your own.
And you got to think about the pets too, right? I mean, we don't often think about that, but yeah, they're not really good at conserving too much. So yeah, you have to have enough water, fresh water for the pets as well, the dogs and the cats and all those kinds of things. So yeah, the water's a big one. Obviously, having the NOAA radio, this is huge. We talk about this a lot, but they're so inexpensive, and for some reason, NOAA signals are just so good. Like the little tiniest NOAA radio, for some reason, always works. There's one channel that you get always, regardless of where you are. Um,
It's like
Flashlights.
1950s TV. You only get one channel.
Yeah, you get one channel, but it works everywhere for some reason. I don't know. There's something about no. Although, to be fair, I've never been in a hurricane aftermath zone. Maybe those NOAA repeaters do get knocked down, but to see the thing coming, I, there's nothing better than a NOAA radio because it's just gonna work. Um,
Agreed.
the flashlights, right? Always having flashlights, that's a big one. You're probably not going to have power after any kind of significant hurricane. We talked a little bit about the meds, having cash, because if the network goes down, the banks are going to be closed, and this could happen even if the bank itself isn't physically damaged. If the network's down and they can't verify funds, they're not going to let you have money just to be nice about it. So having cash around is huge. And then food, right? We've talked about a bunch of different options for this. Everybody should have some amount of preparedness food in their go bag, in their closet, whether it's MREs, whether it's the 25-year shelf life, whether it's the stuff you've pre-packed in the Mylar bags yourself. Just remember that a lot of that food requires energy to prepare. So don't assume that just because you have water and a bucket of salty noodles that you're going to be able to eat that if you only have an electric stove. So think about the ways to
Yes.
prepare your food as well.
Rocket stoves for the win if you can safely burn it. You
Yep.
don't want to give yourself carbon monoxide poisoning because that was the only source you had. Don't use a propane grill inside. Don't cook with charcoal inside. Um, things like an N95 mask for dust or anything like that. That's great for the cleanup or initial hit from the storm, but it's not going to protect you against something like carbon monoxide or just other poisons that are in the atmosphere. It'll help some, but not against that. Having gloves, work gloves, mechanics gloves, things like that, so that you can, if you are putting up your hurricane shutters before the storm, that's going to come in clutch, so you don't get those nasty little splinters that you need a contingency medical kit for.
But having the
Basic
contingency
tools.
medical kit, we talked about this. That's a good thing to have.
I would highly recommend adding one to your bug in or bug out kit, because that water that's coming in out of the ocean is not going to be purified. It's not going to be clean. It's not even going to be filtered, and there's going to be all kinds of shit floating around in it.
Yep.
So having something as a backup plan for when the water is trying to make you sick and kill you, that's your Oregon Trail backup. But basic tools, I would still recommend having a fire extinguisher on hand just in case something drifted into a gas line or a pipe or something like that. Battery banks, your solar lanterns, your solar generators, having a Bic lighter just to keep yourself warm if you need it, that's critical. Um, but I think one of the overlooked ones is really kind of like the battery operated fans, because without power, AC is going to be down
Right.
and your face is going to feel like it's melting before it is. So you may as well be comfortable if you're going to ride it out.
Yeah, hurricanes often happen when it is warmer. So having the fans, that's actually a pretty big one. I've seen some of these little they're like little mini swamp coolers. Have you seen these things, Chris? This is me watching way too much late night TV, but this is one of those like as seen on TV things where it's this little square box. Think of it like half the size of a shoebox, and they're battery powered, and you put water in it, and it has a fan, and then it slowly drips the water onto this kind of membrane, and it's basically like a little mini swamp cooler.
We have one and we use it for camping, but
Yep.
we learned that we can take ice blocks and shove them in there and it works so much better.
I was just gonna tell you that pro tip. What I do is I take that little membrane, it's like a little foamy air filtery thing. I take that, soak it in water, and freeze that thing.
Okay.
And then yeah, same thing. So I just freeze their little thing that's normally soaked in water. And exactly that. Yeah. So these little they won't cool down a large area. But if you have a small room, your interior sort of shelter room, the closet everybody crawls into, the bathroom, they will actually cool that down. And because it's raising the humidity, I guess, in there, then you get that, is it advection or convective cooling? I should know this. I've taken meteorology, but yes, you get a convective cooling effect because of that. But yeah, those little things we should paste a link to those because they're all over Amazon. But they do work, and it's battery powered. You don't need an AC. They're not running a compressor.
Yeah, very true. And a couple other small things that are kind of outside the box. A DIY toilet kit or a chemical toilet, just in case you cannot get out, your plumbing may not be working. The dog waste bags. Yeah, you could technically use those for human waste as well, but that's going to be tough. Um, I would highly recommend building a USB stick backup of all of your documents, photos, um, your insurance policy, photos of your high value items, things like that. And even asset tagging is what it's called. Taking AirPods, or not AirPods, Air tags or QR codes, things like that, that you can put on some of your higher value items just in case they are lost or stolen, especially if you're going to be bugging out. Uh, but this is also where you can create kind of your own mini pop-up mesh network, and there are several companies that do this. They have a small mesh radio transceiver that as soon as you're on that network, it's just a peer-to-peer network, so it can go from point to point to point to point to point all around this little web. So the more devices that you have on it, the better your communication is. Those are just a few of the outside of the box things that you can really go, but it's going to come down to, are you staying or are you going? And you need
Right.
to make that decision early on. So, what is kind of your county's evacuation zone, and what does that actually mean? You don't want to wait for official orders if you know that your area floods. You can do kind of your own home triage for that risk level. What is your elevation? What is your wind protection? Do you have community resilience that you can rely on, or is it going to take 6 months before your HOA can even fix the road that leads out of your community? Create a real, actual plan. Don't just assume that any evacuation shelter you go to is going to allow your pets. Most shelters don't. So if you are planning on hitting up a shelter as an evacuation zone, you may have to reconsider if you're taking your pets. The again, Hurricane Milton, um, the baseball stadium that the Rays play in, that was supposed to be a designated evacuation zone until the roof got ripped off of it. And then that left thousands upon thousands of people who didn't really have anywhere to go. That was the pre-staging area for the ongoing recovery effort as the hurricane was landing.
It's same thing in Katrina as well, right? Where they told everybody, okay, go to the convention center. And then it turned out like that wasn't a good spot. So they brought these buses in. They bust them over to the stadium. Yeah, you're exactly right that there may not those shelters may not be good. and they may not be good for your pets or good for the family. And we heard all kinds of horror stories about Katrina because they just left people in there without a lot of, law enforcement. So maybe trying not to rely on the FEMA camp like we talk about sometimes. Maybe don't do that. Maybe have a plan to not have to rely on those evacuation zones and those the shelters they set up for you.
Choose not to participate.
Choose not to participate in the apocalypse. Just have your own plan and choose not to participate. That's exactly right.
Hurricanes are definitely a logistics challenge because you have to decide early so that you can beat the herd. You don't want to be part of that crowd. Um, the earlier you leave, the better your odds of survival. The house can be rebuilt. All of the stuff inside of the house can be repurchased. And that's where your insurance comes in clutch as a prep. But you can't be replaced, at least not yet with current cloning technology.
With current technology, you cannot be replaced. That's correct.
So, yeah, it becomes a challenge. And you have to consider all of that when you're looking at evacuation or not.
So knowing things like your elevation, your flood zone, your home's limits. What do you have, a stick-built home? Do you have a brick-built home? That may be the difference depending on how fast those winds are. And be honest, if you're not ready to be self-sufficient for 5 days, then yeah, it's time to go.
Absolutely. You want to get ahead of the roads being jammed and fuel running dry. And you can't forget the pets. There are tools. What were the names of those tools that we found online?
Yeah, so the Bring Fido and then the Pets Welcome, those apps.
Yes, those are the ones.
Yep.
So they will get input from FEMA and actually help to list out emergency animal shelters, including ones for larger animals like horses and livestock. So understanding that those are resources you can use as well is just going to help your odds. And then the last thing is if you are in a mandatory evacuation zone, get the fuck out. Don't make it harder on police and fire and EMS who are just going to have to come rescue you later.
Ain't nobody gonna tell me what to do. Get off my lawn.
Okay, I'll see you in a canoe in about 8 hours on your roof.
Oh, so let's talk post-storm stuff, right? So what actually happens after the storm? I think there's a lot of oversights. I think a lot of people don't think about, like you said, the unsanitary water. That's a big one. The comms blackout. I think people don't get that as soon as the power comes back online or power is up somewhere, it doesn't necessarily mean that the cell phone tower is going to be working. Cell may be down for some amount of time because the networks that do work may be totally clogged up with everybody sending their texts out and things like that. Gosh, the generator CO poisoning is one that comes to mind. Didn't you say there were a ton of deaths after Hurricane Ian from CO poisoning because people just weren't used to using a generator that long or in that manner?
Yep, there were 20 plus deaths that were post Hurricane
Wow.
Ian
That's crazy.
because of generator use. And that's only generator use. That does not include cooking inside. But yeah, the cell networks that were hit by Hurricane Helene last year, some of those cell towers still are not up, and that's over 6 months ago. That's 9 months ago. So it can take a while for that infrastructure to come back up. So what you can do to kind of mitigate against that, you can always send the "I'm safe" text before networks go down. That's where that text tree comes in. Um, you know, designate an out of state contact for updates, somebody who's away from the storm path, and they may be your lifeboat. If you send that 911 and they say, all right, I'm 24 hours out, I'll be there, because they have the resources to get to you, that could be your rescue option.
That's a good point.
But documenting damage for your insurance, that's kind of a given. Obviously, your safety is going to come first. Don't think that just because you put up a blue tarp on your roof that it's not potentially going to continue to leak. So once the damage is done, you want to mitigate further damage, but don't just think, oh, I threw up a tarp, it's good. That's pretty much bullshit
Yep.
because
Yep.
you're not.
Right.
But
Yep.
water can be contaminated and it can take weeks to recede. Um, power lines may be down. So if you see a power line on the ground, don't touch it. Assume that it is still a live wire. And as we've seen with Katrina, Ian, Helene, Milton, Harvey, all of those hurricanes, major storms, and help was still days away. That's longer than you want to be on your own.
Yeah, that's a good point. You talked about sort of that community coordination. Do it yourself. Be the community organizer, and having that mutual aid agreement with the neighbors. If you're going to stay, and you've got other neighbors that are going to stay, then coming clean with, hey, here's what I have and here's what I need, and having those radios where you can give people in your neighborhood radios and have that communication in your network, having a small network of other people. If you're going to stay, it's just so much easier to do everything in a group than it is to do it alone, because even just trying to put up a 4x8 sheet of plywood over your window by yourself versus having your neighbor help you and then you helping your neighbor, it's so much easier.
They're heavy as hell.
They're super heavy. And yeah, so just having that community network is huge. And that goes back to the before this happens, you need to coordinate with those people, right? Having you can host hurricane prep night at your house. You can remind everybody, hey, let's print your documents. Who's got water storage? You can have snacks and coffee. You can, it doesn't have to be all doom and gloomy. You can have your My Topo map there, laminated, printed, custom to your area, and everybody's got a dry erase pen so they can mark what businesses they'd like to loot first.
I like it.
But we do talk about that a lot, having the My Topo. I mean, we've got a link to them. I like it. I've got one. I love the fact that it's the middle of the map is my home, and it is a sort of a hybrid satellite topographical map. And so I've got all the roads. It actually has little dots for all the little buildings around me. Everybody's home has a little dot. And so you and your neighbors can take those dry erase pens. You can mark your property lines. Like you said, you can overlay the low points. Where is flooding more likely to happen? Those kinds of things. And it will just help you visualize your plan a little bit better with your neighbors. If you've got 3 or 4 or 5 neighbors and you're looking at this thing going, okay, here's our network on the map. And then you're like, wait, Chris, your house is like below sea level. Like if this thing actually happens, you're in a bad spot. Like just being able to visualize that with your network is huge.
I've got my own personal submarine with a PS5 controller, so below sea level doesn't bother me.
You're fine then. I can't possibly see a scenario where that goes bad for anyone.
Pop. So, yes. So there are a lot of things you can do. I really like the community involvement on this one because you can host, a prep night with snacks and water and your printer if you're willing to shell
Sure.
out the extra money.
Your laminator. I have a laminator. They're so cheap, and I laminate all kinds of weird stuff. I'm like, oh, my insurance card needs to be laminated. Like, they're very inexpensive, but laminating is just cool. I don't know. I was never allowed to use them in grade school, so I bought one, and now I control the world, Miss Fellers.
Do you have a label on your label maker that says label maker?
No, I at one point I did have a label maker. And I don't know what I did with the label maker. I needed the label maker less, but what I did buy recently was the like UPS label printer, the thermal label printer that's just Bluetooth.
Okay.
That's amazing. I don't know if you ship stuff a lot, it's pretty cool. You just do, you can make a label on your phone, whether it's USPS or UPS, and then you just push the button and it Bluetooths and it prints it out and it doesn't have any ink. They're thermal label printers. That's like pro level label printing because I always run out of ink and stuff.
Yeah, and we don't use our printer often enough to warrant having really a printer, but when we need it, we need it.
Yeah, and it's always out of ink.
The ink goes dry in it, and it's like, son of a bitch. I gotta
know.
run to Walmart again before we can print this document that we have to sign. Yeah,
right.
it's such a pain.
Now you've got me thinking about all the things in grade school I wasn't allowed to touch. I'm going to go buy one of those big giant paper cutters and maybe the binder. Remember the weird little thing you could like bind paper with?
Uh-huh.
I need one of those little plastic binder. Yeah, I can afford all that stuff now. I'm just going to go do it myself. Um,
I just need to get a hold of a dot matrix printer and
yes,
print out those giant banners that we used to make in school that are like 30 feet long.
I can still hear that noise. But yeah, having the printer and having the laminator, those are two very valuable things that are not very expensive, and having those available to the neighbors, yep, to print your documents, have them like we said, just as simple as having a printed copy of your insurance policy is huge, because after the storm, think about it like this, that if the storm comes through and you've got damage to your home and now you're wondering, hey, if we go stay in a hotel, is our insurance going to cover that? How much of a hotel are they going to cover? Because if the hotels are damaged, then the hotels that aren't damaged are going to be going for a lot more per night, right? They're going to be very expensive. They're going to go up to and just bump that little price gouging line. So if you've got you and the wife and the dogs and you're trying to figure out, hey, are we out of pocket for this, or is our insurance going to pay for this? You may not be able to get a hold of your insurance agent to ask those questions, and having a printed copy of your policy is just huge, because then you just know. So having those documents printed is just so big, and being able to interpret them, not having that be the first time you've ever read your policy.
Yep. And when Motel 6 starts charging the same as the Ritz-Carlton, that's when you've hit that limit. But
Yep.
just to have your documents laminated for waterproofness.
Yep. Oh
You
yeah,
know,
I was talking about waterproof, not just because it's cool. Although it is cool, I was actually talking because it is waterproof. Yeah.
It's waterproof. It's remarkable. It's
Yeah.
actually tougher, so you're not likely to tear the paper that's inside of it.
Yeah.
Having a laminator is a great idea. Having a label maker is a great idea, as long as you put them to use for good reason.
For good instead of evil. Yeah, exactly.
Don't get your fingers caught in the laminator. That's probably why you weren't allowed to touch it.
I'm sure it was. Oh yeah, absolutely. Or I was laminating bugs or something. But yeah. So having the neighbors over and doing the pre-planning. If you've decided I'm going to stay, then having the other people over that have decided they're going to stay, and deciding who does what, decide on that mutual aid, on that community involvement. And I think that also goes for if you decide to go. You don't have to go alone. If you've decided, hey, I'm going to bug out at the 48-hour mark, then if you've got a neighbor with a bigger vehicle or a trailer who is also going to bug out at that same 48-hour mark, now there's safety in numbers there. Being able to caravan if you are bugging out is huge, because what happens if it's just you alone on the road and you get the flat tire versus having those 2 or 3 or 4 other neighbors in that caravan that are there to help you?
Yeah, speeds up your recovery time from that flat tire a lot, and keeps you safe, keeps somebody watching the road so you don't get clipped by an errant car or something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
100%.
the weird part about hurricanes is we talk about they are kind of regional specifics, but you can apply everything that we've talked about wherever you live, because in the US, and I have lived through this, it was one of the coldest things I think I've ever lived through, but you can come up with something called bombogenesis, which is if the pressure drops by more than 24 millibars in a 24-hour period, you've got a huge low pressure system, and it can create what is effectively an overland hurricane. There was one that hit in 2019 in the Colorado area, and it shut down Colorado Springs for like 3 days.
So this is just like low pressure that shows up for one reason or another, and then you just get a little Coriolis motion, and all of a sudden a hurricane will show up?
It was a Category 1 overland hurricane. It wasn't a hurricane
Wow.
because it's not water fed, but
Yep.
yes. And
Wow, I've never heard of such a thing.
it was something like 8 inches of snow, but it was 90 plus mile an hour winds and just blinding. We had snow blowing into the air ducts inside of the home, and then it was melting inside of the air ducts and dripping into the basement.
Oh, that can cause all kinds of other problems too.
Yep, and it was just the wind speed and the weight of the snow. Normally with water, it wouldn't be a problem, but that snow can float back up and go up those vents. That was terrifying. It was
Wow.
a pain in the ass to deal with, but we made it through. But it can happen anywhere. So if you do have an evacuation plan, whether it's for hurricane, wildfire, probably not for tornadoes because they pop up so frequently now
Yep.
and so randomly. But having a bug out plan for something or a bug in plan and having your own rescue options, if it's a hurricane, maybe you do want to go for that kayak ride down Main Street. Maybe you're going to wait for the National Guard helicopters to show up and then have that little red balloon to show them where you are. But have some sort of backup plan and really apply what we've talked about in this episode to all possible disasters, not specifically hurricanes.
Right. Yeah, and so obviously we're gonna post links on our website of all the things we've talked about, and then where to where to find like your hurricane prep guides. And a lot of this is very easy, right? NOAA does a great job. There's nhc.noaa.gov, which is the National Hurricane Center. So novemberhotelcharlie.noaa.gov. That's a great one. There's a great hurricane preparedness guide there. As always, ready.gov has some great hurricane resources, and that's easy. It's just ready.gov/hurricanes. So we'll post that stuff. And then the Red Cross always has a solid checklist for anybody there. It's very easy. And then I also found a review of like the best like AirTag stuff, and not just Apple based but Android based. So you were talking about asset tagging your valuables if you are going to bug out, either for theft purposes or if things just get blown away. Having them on the pets is nice too, but there's a bunch of really there's all kinds of different technology. Some of them work on Wi-Fi, some of them work on Bluetooth, some of them are actually like GPS based trackers, but there's some really good ones out there, and I'll post a link to that, to not just the Apple products, but there's some Android based ones as well for asset tracking. And I think that's a great idea, not just like you said for the theft, but having an AirTag on your dog's collar in something like this could be huge.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with that, because if you do lose control of your animals and they go for a run because they're scared, but you cannot recover your dog if you're not there to recover them. So you have to weigh that decision immediately. Is it worth going out to get the dog? Is it,
Right.
am I going to die and
Right.
not be able to recover the dog?
There's a cool product, and I know they're not cheap, but there's a great product that Garmin makes. There's one's called the Astro, and the other one's called like the Fido or something. I got to look them up, but they basically, one of them is a shock collar, one of them's not. But what they are is it's a GPS tracker collar, like a dog, like a hunting collar. Basically, it's a GPS tracking collar for the dog, but
Okay.
the receiver has all of the Garmin maps built on. It's an actual GPS, and it has a GMRS radio built in. So it's a standard
Nice.
GMRS radio with a GPS and the little collar tracker thing. Very cool thing to have. It's a hunting tool, but in something like this, where you want to be able to track the dog, you've got a GPS that doesn't require cell phone data, and it's a GMRS radio. So you don't need another Garmin branded radio to communicate with this thing. It's just your standard GMRS channels. I don't know if it's the 15 or the 21 channel block, but any of those like cheaper Midland type radios would also talk to this radio. So it's kind of an all-in-one cool thing where you can see where you are, see where your dog is, or whatever you put that collar on, and communicate with people two ways when the network is down. I think that's a really cool, very cool tool.
I definitely like those. I'm going to have to look into those
Yeah.
for our bug out kit.
Yeah, they're definitely not cheap, but the fact that it does everything, and Garmin, when they bought, I think the company was Delorme, you ended up with not just your standard basic like GPS style maps, but with satellite and topo overlay maps as well. And so it's very cool. You can load all these different maps on there and actually get a really almost like a Google Earth overlay of your area, but it doesn't require Google. It doesn't require the cell network. It's all built there on the chip. And then obviously like what's the brand? The Onyx brand is pretty cool. That's a map company that works in the Garmin environment. So you can buy the Onyx chip and put that in your Garmin. And that's the one that hunters use because it has all of the property lines, which is pretty cool. Because if you think about after a hurricane, you may actually not know whose property you are camped out on if everything is totally obliterated. And it actually has like the property line markers and says the name of the person that owns that property. I thought that was pretty cool.
That's a really good point, is you may not have the same property line depending on how
you,
bad that
you
hurricane
might
is.
not know. Yeah, if everything's blown away and the fence is blown down, you may not actually know whose property. You may not know whether or not you can tell people to get off your lawn.
Especially if it's under 4 feet of water.
Right. Right.
But I think that's about going to wrap us up for this one. Preparing for this is not about fear. It's about continuity. It's about showing up for the system that you have in place and showing up for you, your family, and really having everyone's best interest at heart. But AC, anything else to add in before we close this one out?
No, I think you covered it all.
Excellent. Well, as always, join us next week for our next little adventure. We will see you then, but until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder.